All right, let's dive into the world of Puglia wine. You've given us some really great stuff to work with.
Yeah.
We've got excerpts from a book about the region
hmm
and these two articles that go deep into the history and terroir of Puglia wine.
Cool.
So think of this as your crash course in Puglia wine, from like the basics to those surprising facts you might not see on the back of the bottle.
You know what I find really cool is how Puglia has gone from like being known for bulk wine to being this region that's crafting, seriously impressive stuff. It's like they finally realized their potential.
It's totally a glow-up moment for them,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
But before we get into all that, let's set the scene a little bit.
hmm
Now, being a wine enthusiast, you're already familiar with Italy's like patchwork of wine regions.
hmm
Where does Puglia fit into that whole puzzle?
So, you know how Tuscany and Piedmont are famous for those like elegant, structured wines?
Hmm.
Well, Puglia brings something different. They're all about bold, fruit-forward reds. They pack a punch.
And that boldness, I'm guessing, comes down to the grapes themselves.
Absolutely. We're talking about native varieties like Primitivo, Negro Amaro, and Nero di Troia. They're the stars of the show. Primitivo, for example, it's basically Puglia's answer to Zinfandel. You get those bold, fruity flavors, almost hedonistic, really.
Okay, now that's the kind of detail I was hoping for. And it's not just reds either.
Right.
I was surprised to see that Puglia actually produces white, rosé, even sparkling wines.
Yeah, it surprised me too at first, but it shows you just how diverse and how much potential the region has, and that's where things get really interesting. Puglia has been undergoing a revolution in its winemaking.
Hmm, a revolution. What do you think sparked that? Was it the winemakers themselves, or were they responding to, like, changing tastes?
It's a bit of both, actually. There was this growing awareness that Puglia was capable of so much more than what it was known for. Winemakers started investing in new technology, rediscovering those native grapes, and really focusing on expressing the terroir. At the same time, consumers were starting to look for more authentic wines with personality, and Puglia was in a perfect position to deliver.
Okay, so we've got this exciting region, a lineup of unique grapes. But what about the land itself? What about the terroir? I read about Puglia's Mediterranean climate. What makes it ideal for growing grapes?
Well, it's the combination of factors, really. You've got hot, dry summers, mild winters, and tons of sunshine, perfect for ripe, flavorful grapes. But it's not just about the heat. The sea has a moderating influence, creating these refreshing breezes that are essential for healthy vineyards.
So it's all connected, the land and the sea. And then there's the soil.
Right.
I read about Puglia having these diverse soil types, limestone, clay, sand. As a wine enthusiast, I'm always curious how those differences in the soil come through in the glass.
Think of it like a recipe where each ingredient adds another layer of complexity. In Puglia, you've got these distinct zones, each with its own terroir. It's fascinating, really.
So let's break down those zones. Where should we start?
Let's go north to the Dania. It's mountainous with a continental climate and clay and limestone soils. This is where you get those powerful, complex reds. Aglianico and Nero di Troia really thrive there. Dania wines tend to be more structured, age-worthy.
So if I'm picturing this correctly, Danya's where I'd go for a serious, contemplative glass of red.
Absolutely.
What's next on our tour?
Let's head south to the Merge Plateau. This is the heart of those big, robust reds, Primitivo and Negromaro country. It's hot and dry, so you get those powerful, in-your-face flavors. Think party in your mouth wines. Mm.
Two down, two to go.
Yep.
What about the southern tip?
Ah, the Salento Peninsula. It's coastal with sandy and clay soils and produces those full-bodied aromatic reds that Puglia is becoming known for. This is where you'll find Negro Amaro shining, along with Malvasia Nera and Primitivo. These wines tend to have bright acidity and a touch of salinity from the sea.
Mountains, plateaus, coastlines. It all adds to the variety.
It does.
What's the last piece?
The Itria Valley. It's tucked away in the center south, kind of hilly and a bit cooler. This is where you find those fresh, aromatic white wines. Verdeca and Bianco d'Alessano are the stars here.
It's amazing how much variety you can find in a single region. Okay, this terroir talk is great, but let's get to the grapes themselves.
Yes.
I'm really intrigued by those native varieties.
They're the heart of Puglia wine, for sure. Let's dive into a few standouts.
I've already heard a bit about Primitivo, and I have to admit, I'm curious. What else can you tell me?
So Primitivo gives you these full-bodied wines that just explode with aromas of ripe black fruits, plums, blackberries, even dried figs. Then you layer in spices like cloves, cinnamon, maybe a hint of chocolate or tobacco. It's a really complex and satisfying experience.
I usually prefer lighter reds, but you're describing Primitivo in a way that it's almost seductive.
It is.
Like it starts with that fruit-forward charm, but then there's all this complexity underneath.
Exactly. And because of its boldness, it pairs so well with hearty dishes. Grilled meats, rich pasta sauces, definitely some mature cheeses.
Okay, Primitivo is officially on my list. Now, I've also seen a lot about Negro Amaro. What's the story with that one?
Negro Amaro is all about intensity. Think deep ruby wines with those black cherry, plum, blackberry aromas, and then those earthy notes like licorice, tobacco, even a hint of eucalyptus.
So Primitivo is more fruit-forward. The Negro Amaro brings those savory, earthy elements.
Spot on, and it's a classic pairing for the local cuisine. Rich meat sauces, game, cured cheeses, a true taste of Puglia. Oh, and did I mention they even make rosés with Negro Amaro?
Wait, really? A Negro Amaro rosé? I'll have to track that down. Yeah. Okay, and another red that caught my eye was Nero di Troia. What makes this one unique?
Nero di Troia is the one for people who love elegant, structured wines. It gives you wines with complex aromas of black fruit, herbs, spices like black pepper and clove. And then there's these mineral and floral undertones that just add another layer.
So it's a bit more, like, sophisticated.
For sure. It's perfect for those who love food and wine pairing. Imagine it with grilled red meats, mushroom risottos, aged cheeses.
Okay, you're making me hungry.
Yeah.
All right, we've covered some fantastic reds. Let's talk whites. Verdecca really stood out to me.
Oh, Verdecca is fantastic. It's all about those vibrant citrus aromas, lemon, grapefruit, green apple, along with white flowers, and a distinct minerality.
I love a wine with good minerality.
Yeah.
What would you say is the quintessential Verdecca experience?
You have to try a Verdecca from the Locorotondo DOC. Those wines are famous for their lightness, freshness, and that classic Verdecca character. Think crisp acidity, floral notes, and a hint of almond on the finish.
Okay, Loca Rotondo, noted. Any other whites we should be looking for?
Fianna Minutolo is another one that always impresses me. It's from the Toronto region and has these intense citrus and floral aromas, jasmine, acacia, and then those mineral and herbal nuances you mentioned. It's a really elegant white that can age beautifully.
Before this deep dive, I had this idea that Italian whites were all about, like, lightness and crispness. But the way you're describing Fianna Minutolo, that complexity is really interesting.
That's the beauty of wine.
It is.
There's always something new to discover.
So we've covered the grapes, the climate, the terroir. But I'm curious about the winemaking process in Puglia. From what I've read, it seems like they have this interesting mix of traditional and modern techniques.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that makes Puglia so exciting. They're embracing both the old and the new.
I love that. But do those approaches ever clash? Like, are there disagreements between the traditionalists and the more modern winemakers?
I mean, there are different schools of thought for sure, but there's a real respect for the region's winemaking heritage. On one hand, you have producers carrying on those old traditions, using those big wooden vats or cement vats for fermentation and aging, going for spontaneous fermentation, and using techniques like extended maceration to get the most out of those thick-skinned red grapes.
It sounds like they're really honoring those time-tested methods.
They are, but then you have those who are bringing in modern technology, things like temperature control, micro-oxygenation to soften the tannins, and even using selected yeasts for more predictable results. It's about striking that balance between tradition and new possibilities.
It sounds like a dynamic wine scene.
It is, and that energy is really pushing the quality of Puglia wine forward.
You mentioned DOC earlier when talking about the Loca Rotondo wines.
Yes.
You, as a wine enthusiast, are probably familiar with the Italian DOC system.
Of course.
But how does that system work in Puglia specifically?
It's the same idea, ensuring quality and authenticity. But there are some DOCs in Puglia that are really worth exploring.
Okay, I'm ready. Tell me about them.
Well, for those Primitivo fans out there, you have to try Primitivo di Manduria DOC. Some of the boldest, most aromatic Primitivo wines come from there, often with that concentrated black fruit, spice, and a touch of sweetness.
So if I see Primitivo di Manduria DOC on a bottle, I know it's been made with certain rules in place, that there's a guarantee of quality. What other DOCs should we know about?
Another good one is Castel del Monte DOC. This region is known for having diverse terroirs and is especially famous for those elegant Nero di Troia wines. You'll also find some excellent white and rosé wines under that DOC.
Okay, give me one more.
Right, how about Salice Salentino DOC? It's Negro Amaro Central, those full-bodied, smooth wines with red fruit and spice. It's a great place to explore that grape.
This is great. It's amazing how much we've already learned about Puglia wine.
And we're just getting started.
Before we go any further, though, I'm curious, beyond just the technical stuff, what about the experience of Puglia wine? Like visiting the region, meeting the people, really getting a feel for the place.
Ah, that's what makes Puglia so special. It's not just about the wine, it's the whole experience. Beautiful landscapes, historic towns, delicious food, and a welcoming culture. A wine lover's dream.
All right, paint me a picture. What are some of the highlights?
Well, there are these fantastic wine routes you can explore. Imagine driving through vineyards, stopping at wineries along the way, tasting great wines while taking in the scenery. You've got the Primitivo di Manduria route, the Negro Amaro route, and tons more. It's a great way to immerse yourself in Puglia wine.
And the wineries themselves. What can you expect when you visit?
A lot of them offer guided tours, so you can see the whole process from grape to bottle. You can meet the winemakers, hear their stories, and learn about their philosophy. And of course, there are tastings, often paired with local cuisine, which really completes the experience.
Are there any, like, really unique tasting experiences? Something a little off the beaten path?
Absolutely. You'll find wineries housed in historic settings, medieval castles, old farmhouses that have been turned into beautiful venues. So you're sipping world-class wine surrounded by history.
Okay, you've convinced me. Puglia is going on the travel bucket list.
You won't regret it.
But before we get too carried away with vacation planning, I do want to talk about the challenges facing the region. We've talked about tradition, a bright future. But are there any obstacles Puglia's winemakers are dealing with?
There are. But what's encouraging is that adapt. And of course, like everywhere else, climate change is a major concern.
Absolutely. It's a global issue.
Yeah.
But how is it specifically impacting Puglia? We've talked about the hot, dry climate. Is that changing?
Well, rising temperatures are leading to water shortages, and extreme weather events are happening more often. Heat waves, droughts, sudden downpours, and those can damage the vines and impact the grape quality.
So what are producers doing to adapt?
There's a real emphasis on sustainable practices. They're experimenting with drought-resistant grape varieties, trying out water-saving irrigation, and adapting how they manage their vineyards to protect the vines from extreme weather.
It sounds like sustainability is a real priority for them.
It has to be. They know that if they want to succeed, they need to protect the land. And then there's the challenge of competition.
Oh, right, of course.
The global wine market is huge, and Puglia needs to find its niche. They're up against regions with big names and long-standing reputations.
So how can they make themselves stand out? What makes them special?
It comes down to focusing on their strength. They need to showcase those amazing native grapes, their quality-driven production, and their unique regional identity.
It's about telling their story and letting their wines speak for themselves. What else should they be thinking about for the future?
They need to keep an eye on consumer trends. Tastes are constantly evolving, so they have to adapt. Whether that means exploring organic or natural winemaking, or creating wines that appeal to specific lifestyles and preferences, they can't just stand still.
So considering all these challenges, are you optimistic about the future of Puglia wine?
I am, definitely. I see a region that's embracing change, focusing on quality, and realizing its full potential. Puglia has everything it needs to become a major player in the world of wine. It's just a matter of time.
Well, this has been really eye-opening. I'm eager to learn even more about Puglia wine, but let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll explore Puglia's history as the cantina of Italy and see how that's shaping their future. Stay with us. Welcome back to our deep dive into Puglia wine. Before the break, we were talking about all the challenges facing the region.
Yeah.
But to really get where Puglia is headed, I think it's important to understand its history. Specifically, that whole cantina of Italy thing.
Ah, yes, the cantina, basically the wine cellar, right? For years, Puglia was known for making wine on a huge scale, quantity over quality. It was all about supplying that bulk wine for blending and everyday drinking.
So not exactly those like small wineries and fancy vintages.
Not really. But that history of producing so much wine, it actually played a big part in shaping the traditions and the grapes we see in Puglia today.
Okay, I find that really interesting. How did that happen? How did focusing on quantity end up influencing what we're seeing now?
Well, think about it. To produce wine in such large amounts, you need grapes that are tough, adaptable, and can produce a lot of fruit. And that's where those native varieties like Primitivo and Negro Amaro come in. They just thrive in that hot, dry climate, and they can pump out tons of grapes.
So it's like survival of the fittest, but for grapes.
Exactly. Over centuries, winemakers figured out how to work with these grapes. They were making wines that were generally more rustic and robust, meant to be drunk young, often locally.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it? These grapes that were once seen as just workhorses, pumping out that bulk wine,
Yeah,
they're now being celebrated for their unique quality
right.
and for making these world-class wines.
It's a pretty amazing transformation, and it really shows the vision of those winemakers who saw the potential of the grapes and the terroir. They realized Puglia could be so much more than just a bulk supplier.
Yeah. It's like they're reclaiming their heritage and saying, this is what Puglia wine can be. It's
Exactly.
really inspiring. And now I'm curious to learn more about the people behind it all.
Yeah.
We've talked about the land, the grapes, the techniques, but what about the human element? What are the winemakers in Puglia like?
You find a real mix of generations, each one bringing their own perspective and passion. You've got families that have been making wine for generations, passing down their knowledge and traditions, that deep connection to the land and those old ways.
Like a lot of those old world wine regions.
Exactly. But then you have these younger winemakers, too. They're coming in with fresh ideas and a more modern approach, experimenting with new techniques, traveling to other wine regions to learn. And they're really pushing the boundaries.
It sounds like a pretty dynamic mix.
Yeah.
Do those two groups ever clash, the traditionalists and the innovators?
There's always that tension between old and new, right? But what I've seen is a lot of mutual respect. The younger generation is learning from the experience of those who came before them. And the older generation, they're excited about the energy and those new ideas coming in.
It's that mix that often creates the best results.
Who does?
And speaking of results, we can't ignore the fact that Puglia wines are winning awards and getting attention from critics all over the world. It's not a secret anymore.
It's fantastic to see, and it's well-deserved. These wines are expressive, they have character, they tell a story, they're not trying to be something they're not. They're embracing what makes them unique.
That's what I love about Italian wines in general. It's that sense of place. You can almost taste the land, the climate, the culture in every glass. And it sounds like Puglia wines really embody that.
Oh, they do. There's a real authenticity to them, and I think that's what people are responding to. It's not trying to be Bordeaux or Napa Valley. It's proudly Puglia.
So let's say someone is brand new to Puglia wine. What's the one bottle they should try? The one that really captures the essence of the region.
If I had to pick just one, I'd say go for a Primitivo di Manduria. It's kind of their flagship wine. It shows off those bold, fruit-forward flavors that Puglia is known for. It's a great introduction to the style.
All right, Primitivo di Manduria. Let's go on the
Yeah.
list. Okay, now before we move on, I want to touch on those challenges again. Climate change competition, changing consumer tastes. Those are real issues facing Puglia's winemakers.
Oh, they are. And I don't want to downplay that. But what I'm seeing is that a lot of proactive steps are being taken. Producers are aware of these problems and they're finding ways to adapt.
So it's not just about talking about the problems, it's about doing something.
Exactly. For climate change, we're seeing producers trying out drought-resistant grape varieties, new water-saving irrigation techniques, and changing how they manage their vineyards to protect the vines from extreme weather.
Sounds like sustainability is a big focus.
It has to be. They know that taking care of the land is crucial for their future. And when it comes to competition, they're really stepping up their marketing and branding, telling their story, connecting with consumers, highlighting what makes Puglia wine special.
Finding that balance between preserving tradition and using modern tools.
Exactly, that's the key. They're not afraid to evolve and adapt, but they're also holding on to their heritage.
Well, based on everything we've talked about, I'm feeling pretty optimistic about the future of Puglia wine. It sounds like a region that's on the rise.
I agree. There's a real energy and momentum in Puglia right now, and I think we're just seeing the beginning.
We've been talking about the modern story of Puglia wine, but I'm also really fascinated by its ancient history.
Yeah.
I read that people have been growing grapes and making wine in Puglia for centuries.
Wow.
What can you tell me about those early days of winemaking?
Now we're going way back. We have to start with the Greeks. They were some of the first to bring grapevines to Puglia. They saw the potential for winemaking there.
Really? I had no idea it went back that far.
Oh, yeah. We're talking 8th century BC. During the time of Magna Graecia, they saw that perfect climate, the fertile soil, and they knew Puglia could be a winemaking paradise. It's really thanks to them that this whole story began.
Wow, thousands of years of winemaking tradition. And of course, we can't forget about the Romans. I know they had a huge impact on winemaking throughout Italy. But how did they shape the wine landscape in Puglia?
Well, as the Roman Empire expanded, so did their love of wine. And they saw Puglia as this perfect place to produce wine on a large scale. They invested in vineyards infrastructure. They really helped ramp up production.
So Puglia became like a key supplier for the Roman Empire.
A major source of wine for the entire Mediterranean. Imagine those ancient Romans sipping on their Puglia wine. Makes you wonder what they'd think of the wines being made today.
I know.
Yeah.
It's like we're connected to them through this shared love of wine. And the story doesn't end with the Romans. What happened after that?
Over the centuries, Puglia has been influenced by so many different cultures: Byzantines, Normans, Arabs, each one leaving its mark on the region's winemaking. They brought new grapes, new techniques, new ideas. It's all part of what makes Puglia wine so unique.
Like every chapter in Puglia's history added another layer to its wines.
Exactly. And the story's still unfolding. I think that's what makes it so fascinating.
This whole deep dive has been amazing.
Mhm.
It's really opened my eyes to the world of Puglia wine. I've always loved Italian wine, but I usually go for those more famous regions like Tuscany and Piedmont. But now I'm seeing Puglia in a whole new light.
That's the beauty of exploring wine. There's always something new to discover, and Puglia is definitely full of surprises.
It is. It's a region with so much history, but also so much potential. They're proud of their traditions, but they're also looking to the future, and they're making some really incredible wines.
I couldn't agree more. I think this is a great place to pause for now. And when we come back, we'll talk more about what makes Puglia wine so unique and why it's a region worth paying attention to. Stay with us.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Puglia wine. Before the break, we were taking that trip back in time, through the history of winemaking in this region.
Yeah.
And now I want to bring it back to the present
Okay.
and talk about, what makes Puglia wine so unique? What sets it apart?
One of the things that really strikes me about Puglia is that it's kind of carving out its own path within the Italian wine world.
Mm.
When you think about Italian wine, you think about Tuscany, Piedmont, Barolo, Brunello, but Puglia, they're doing something different, something really cool.
They are. It's like they're rewriting the rules, but without forgetting their roots.
Yeah.
So what would you say are some of the things that really make Puglia wine stand out?
Well, first off, it's those native grapes. Puglia is like this treasure chest of indigenous varieties that you just won't find anywhere else. Primitivo Negro Amaro, Nero de Troya. They're the heart of Puglia wine. And they can produce wines that are so complex and interesting.
I'm really loving that sense of authenticity.
Right.
Like Puglia saying, hey, this is us. Take it or leave it.
Exactly. And it's not just the grapes, it's also about the terroir, those unique combinations of climate and soil, that really shape the wines. Puglia has this incredible diversity of terroirs, from the mountains to the coast. And that's reflected in the wines. You get those bold reds, but also those crisp mineral whites.
Like a wine lover's paradise. And we can't forget about that mix of tradition and innovation we talked about earlier.
Right.
Puglia's winemakers are really finding that balance between the old ways and the new.
It's that balance that's really pushing the quality up. They're not afraid to try new things, but they're also staying true to their roots. And that's what makes Puglia wine so interesting. It's familiar, but also surprising.
It's interesting how Puglia's reputation has changed. Over the years, it was known as the cantina of Italy, the bulk wine producer. But now it's becoming known for quality and innovation. What do you think has driven that shift?
I think it's a few things. First, you've got the passion of the winemakers themselves. They've really upped their game, investing in technology, refining their techniques, and focusing on the terroir. And then there's the demand for authentic wines. People are tired of mass-produced stuff. They want something with character, something that tells a story. And Puglia is perfectly positioned to deliver that.
It's like everything's coming together for them. And I think that focus on quality is bringing in a new generation of wine lovers who are excited to discover Puglia.
It's great to see. And I think this is only the beginning. Puglia has so much potential. I'm excited to see what they do next.
Me too. This deep dive has been a real eye-opener for me. Before this, I knew a little bit about Puglia wine. I tried some Primitivo here and there. But now I feel like I have a much deeper understanding of the region.
That's what we're going for, giving you the knowledge and confidence to really explore the world of wine.
Mission accomplished. I'm definitely feeling inspired to try more Puglia wines and maybe even plan a trip there.
I highly recommend it.
I bet our listeners are feeling the same way. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember about Puglia wine?
I think it's this. Puglia is redefining Italian wine. It's a place where history and innovation come together, where you get those bold flavors, but also that unexpected elegance. It's a region that's worth exploring, both in your glass and in person.
Beautifully said. So cheers to Puglia, a region that's winning over hearts and palates one sip at a time.
Yeah.
And to all our listeners out there, keep exploring.